Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the IDRiM podcast. And here we are with ADN again, celebrating their global campaign on International Awareness Day for Avoidable Death, AAD4D, this year. And this year we have a guest from Montreal University in Canada. And we would like to know how the global campaign is celebrated in there. So, for Dr. Ranjan, could you introduce yourself and your role in ADN?
Well, thank you so much. My name is Ranjan Tata. I'm Canada Research Chair and Associate Professor at Indigenous Studies at the Faculty of Arts. I have been doing mostly disaster research in Canada with Indigenous community, Black community, racialized community, and also Canadian Arctic. I do work in Bangladesh, Nepal, and also Ghana, mostly focusing on community perspective on disaster adaptation. So my role in IDRiM as a Canada chapter, so understanding how community understand the meaning of disaster or meaning of death or meaning of how it has been created. So my role is to bringing or centering community perspective and also solution from community-led solution, not only community engaged solution. The difference between community-led and community engaged is significant. Community-led means community, they explore what should be the solution from their everyday practice. For example, I've been working with various indigenous community here. For example, Cree First Nation community, Star Blanket Cree First Nation community, Sutina First Nation community, Kainai First Nation community in TD6 and TD7 territory. So from their perspective, all the disaster has been created by the ongoing settler colonization. And their solution is to centering the indigenous land-based science that has been sustainable for thousands of years. So most of my work to centering politically the community needs and community ways of solving the problem.
Thank you for that. So my question is, you mentioned about the Canadian chapter of ADN. Can you go a bit more details about how it started, what's its scope, its size currently?
Well, I started my journey on disaster research almost is 11 years, and I knew with Dr. Nivedita from Lancaster University, I would say last 5 years ago. Then we were discussing, because we are doing kind of similar work, because indigenous community or racialized community, they see that disaster mostly human created because of the ongoing settler colonialism in Canada. Then we were discussing, okay, this is the great initiative, global great initiative that Canada can contribute, and also Canada can learn. So when I did my research or talking with the indigenous community, we discussed about it, and I found the similar stories, similar ways that I have learned from, as you can see, settler of color scholar from Canada, who born and raised in Bangladesh, which is global south. So we discuss about it, and I found lots of similarities here. So I started, I would say, last 3 years ago with my disaster course in my university. We have a community disaster research center here. So we discuss about it, and we brought elders on the event that we have started last 3 years, and we have seen the inspiration from the elders, and also interest, curiosity from the student that they want to be part of it, because we have mixed forms of students from the interdisciplinary and international countries as well. So as you know, the Canada has lots of immigrant communities, those who are coming from global south, including Bangladesh, India, or other parts of the world, include many parts of the Africa as well. And I thought that is the great initiative that we can start the discussion and understanding it, because so that they can contribute here as an immigrant or as a black scholar, and they also can take this knowledge to their back home.
Now, as you mentioned how it develops from the beginning and up until the establishment as today, it's focusing on the indigenous community and how communities prepare for disaster risk in general. So, how about this global campaign this year? Is there any particular activities that's been doing to celebrate this awareness day?
Yes, I think this year it was special because Professor Nivedita, she came and she presented, and as we are also discussing many disaster, particularly Arctic and also Canada, and or also other parts of the world. For example, we discuss about Nepal, we discuss about Bangladesh, Filipino, or other indigenous area, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii. We discuss what does actually disaster mean for the various indigenous or minority communities in their back home. And because we are learning about international perspective on indigenous studies. So I have been teaching two courses with many different international students and also domestic students, also indigenous students, Black students, and also immigrant students. So we did 2 days event, March 3rd, March 4th and 5th. So the Professor Nivedita, she came and this shared the perspective, and we created a question, what does actually disaster mean to you? And it's a completing sentence, and they completed the sentence. We did afterwards when Dr. Nivedita done, then we did lots of uh, uh, individual or group discussion and understanding what does it mean, where we need to move forward with, and why it is important, particularly knowing as a fourth year undergraduate student, and if they want to do the higher study with it, or if they go there back home, what kind of awareness they want to build, or the indigenous student here, they're thinking, okay, there are many disasters. For example, here forest fire disaster, and many deaths, not only human, also non-human, can be avoidable if building the awareness within the community and also self-governance. So that's why this year it was very special. We discussed together in indigenous studies course as a collective team, and multinational team, and student afterwards they were interested to learn about it. They also reflected in their assignment. They presented in their poster presentation. So it has created a huge impact. So awareness week, what I see the opportunity to center the discussion, then student can think about it. So that's why like other international days, for example Women's Day or Environmental Day, this is the day or the month that we can create the atmosphere or space for the scholar, for the student, for the community member. So it's for all of us to understanding why this is important and how we can understand, we can deal with it, because we don't, if we the students or community member, they don't understand, they don't talk about it, they don't want to understand it, they don't want to take part of the solution. That's why it was a significant part of this year for Canada part that I have been doing with my students.
Yeah, sounds really good. And this is a question that I've actually asked a number of the other chapters as well, and I'm going to ask about, to yourself as well. So what I can see is very much about putting the theory into practice and discussing it. How do the students respond to that? Because some students, as I've mentioned a few times in podcasts now, I go into community schools and try and teach climate change, and you get a bit of a mix. So how have the students responded to a more practical base over theory?
Well, my course or the students are a bit different than the other classes or other content they teach, because most of the students, indigenous students particularly, they face disaster like every day. because of the land issue or forest fire issue, because I live in the Midwest part of the Canada, and we have significant disaster, for example, flood, forest fire, heat wave, and it's not past issue. So they are not working for someone else; they are working for them. So that's why it's a bit different than people those who want to work for others, because they see the disaster. And our course is about indigenous studies, which is not we are doing for others. It's not building awareness for others. So it's not we versus others, it's for us. That's why we talk about how disaster is impact of the settler colonialism, ongoing settler colonialism, racism, and also the oppression, ongoing inequality, poverty is interconnected. So people talk about what is their responsibility, how they see it from their community perspective, from their self perspective, from their colonial historical perspective within themselves. So people are students who are coming from other parts of the world, they also connect, okay, what kind of disaster they have faced. So they're talking about from themselves, for talking about from their family, talking about their community. So they are not outsider that they want to help someone. They need to help themselves to building the awareness. That's why it's a bit different then, because I remember when I was taking the course, when my studentship, we were told to solve the problem for other people, and my positionality was kind of in my education time, okay, we need to train ourselves to help others. That is the most of the education, colonial education system, instead of changing who we are and who we need to be from ourselves first. That's why my course is called Decolonizing Research and Researcher both. So when we are talking about decolonization, it's understanding who I am, what is my worldview, and what I'm doing. If my education is not helping me to change who I am, actually it's not going to helpful for others. So it is come from self, then it's a family, then community, then challenging the system. That's why it's big different structure. That's why the students are very inspired here. People want to talk about it. People want to uh, uh, build their self-determination by themselves through their language, through their education, through their elders and knowledge keeper. It's very different structure than the colonial education system that we have. We are surrounded. So that's why students are inspired. Students wants to write a chapter on it. People want to, students not only finishing their learning in the classroom, they wanted to take this learning to their community. At the same time, they bring their knowledge, for example, their grandparents' knowledge, parents' knowledge, community member knowledge, they bring to the class so that they can understand, okay, how I can practice it. Whatever awareness we are building in the classroom, how we can discuss with the family member, and family member can understand what to do when it is emergency happening.
So it's basically, it's very nice to hear it. It's basically from the beginnings, how it's the education goes to student, and students disseminate further to not only themselves but also the broader community that live in. So then we asked about, since I think what you've done is very excellent work here, and like it's been like quite a few years. This, is there any particular goals that or message that you want to establish more, in particular from this year onward, or do you want to broaden your approach to the bigger problems, or keep focusing the smaller one and then keep disseminating so it dispersed to bigger communities?
What I use trans-systemic approach. Trans-systemic approach, that means we focus on the community. First, we decolonize ourselves, how our education actually is helpful or not helpful to understand my positionality, or my need, community need, or societal need. So we start from ourselves and also start from the community perspective. So it's various system, but system support center for the community needs from the not about education need. For example, when we are talking about the forest fire, because Canada is suffering every year, lots of people they have to evacuate from their house, regardless they're indigenous, immigrant, or settler communities. Everybody has to. So what problem was is when disaster happened, is people are talking about it, but people don't want to talk about how it has been created, how it has can be mitigated before it happens. So the forest fire in the indigenous community, it is not new, it's long run, and they used to maintain it from their traditional practice. I can give you one example. I came from the Thailand. It's a Chiang Mai indigenous community. Every morning they pray to their forest. It's not religious prayer, but spiritual prayer. They understand their forest is their part of their family or part of themselves. And every evening, so when they are praying or hunting in Canada, for example, in the forest, they don't only hunt, they observe the forest, which forest is vulnerable, and how to protect, and which tree is vulnerable. When the indigenous governance, regardless in global south and global north, indigenous governance, forest governance is taken away, and colonial governance was pushed over there, it became forests are not more, no more maintaining. So relationship has been taken away. So indigenous community, local community, they don't have access to the forest. Even though they have access, they don't have governance or traditional burning practice they used to do it. That if this area is or this plant is vulnerable, they used to burn. That was the part of their culture. So once it's done, stop it, the forest became vulnerable. And when forest fire happened, they were told, okay, you have to live within an hour. So it is not only human. Think about their animal, traditional animal, plant, insect, everything, their relatives. So once they only human is taking back to the hotel or other places, they're not only losing their what's this called their property, but losing themselves, losing their relationship, and which create lots of trauma, psychological trauma to the adult, to youth, you can name it. And and even though it's maybe 15 years back, but still this trauma generation to generation is carrying. And they, once you lost all those relationship, you are actually become homeless. Homeless means it's not physical house, it's a relationship that has been taken away. So what I have seen in the when flood happens, when forest happens, is who all, and according to the indigenous or local community in Bangladesh, for example, the place I came from, they call it is all created, because they block the river flow or water flow because of the property, because of the housing by the outsider or new colonial development setting mindset. And also in Canada, it's the same way, because their rights has been taken away, and the outsider, they don't know how to maintain the forest as the indigenous people they did it thousands of years. And when forest fire happen, it's not natural no more, because it's not maintaining, it's not understanding that used to do it. So that's why it was very critical that how the ongoing colonization in global north, global south is creating the disaster. And when we are talking about that, is we only think about human, and we always not include, because it's patriarchy mindset that are not understanding the non-human rights. So, but non-human in indigenous culture or local land-based culture is very significant. That's why our worldview, the way we understand, has to change. Our 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 thinking needs to change. That how we need to understand that we are part of the forest or we are the forest, so that we're not separating between we have a right to manage the forest, instead of we need to understand the relationship with the forest or the flood or with the water.
Absolutely. And, in Canada, it really was imposed. As someone who has got Canadian family as well, knows quite a lot about the Canadian history. It was brutal how the local people were suppressed, and their knowledge was lost because of this and drowned out. So my next final question will be, how have the community responded that there are now organizations who are actually listening, to their needs, their challenges, and actually giving them a voice, on the future, on trying to stop these
Mhm.
disasters from happening in the future or reduce their risk?
Right. One of the perspective, I call myself as a decolonial scholar. Decolonial scholar, it means we have a responsibility to learn from the community. And my responsibility when we go to the community or what community wants, they become scientists and we become learner. So it's not that we can help them, they can help themselves by getting their land rights, getting their language right, because it's not that indigenous people, they don't know how to solve the problem. They know their land, their tree, their plant, their insect, everything. So only they can themselves empower them or create the self-determination. So what we need to do as a ADRiM as an organization, or we as a researcher, we need to understand and learn and center in our research, center their perspective in our research into also policy changing. So policymaker, they need to see this is science. This is not something they can think, okay, it's important, but not incorporating in the policy changing. So they are, because their knowledge is science, because they have been practicing, it's already proven. They don't need any validation from us. What we need to do, for my understanding, you think in Canada or Bangladesh, Nepal, that I have been working, we need to change ourselves, understanding that, look, this is what they have been doing, this is the science, and we need to change our policy, the way we manage the disaster, the way we understand the issue, in a way community they can lead us instead of we are leading them.
I completely agree. And, Harris, we did a podcast last year where we said you can't, move. If a policy works in one place, it doesn't mean it's going to work somewhere else, because everyone's different, different communities, different ways of, doing, things, because we've learned over the past on what works, what doesn't work. And, the sad thing is in Canada, we, in the 1800s, we just threw all that out the window and try and impose our way of doing it. And so I completely agree with that. Harris, would you like to close?
Yeah, that's basically wonderful talks sort of with you that we heard the perspective from Canada and how it's actually dealing with the indigenous communities, the more prepared for disaster risk and as well as to avoid death given many circumstances. So that's it, everyone. Thank you very much for listening us today, and there will be some more podcasts with ADN. It's closings, but more people will come and talk about these global campaigns, and hopefully everyone who listen this enjoy this episode. And see you next time.